The Handkerchief, written by Gr8t 78. Harry Potter and the Wizarding World is the sole masterpiece of J.K. Rowling. Chapter 56. The one where they take a break. After receiving the message of his father's escape the night before, Draco woke up the next morning, having not slept much at all. He had tossed and turned most of the night, and had finally given in to sleep somewhere close to 4 o'clock in the morning. When his alarm sounded at 7 o'clock, he woke up with a start. He had been dreaming of Dementors, his mind making up the gruesome details of what their mouths must look like. As thankful as he was to be out of the dream, he knew he needed more sleep. His stomach was in knots, and his mind felt filled with cotton. He rolled over and looked at Theo, who was sitting awake, ever the morning person, writing what looked to be his Muggle Studies essay, based on the book entitled I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Morning. Everyone else still asleep. He asked sleepily. Theo replied, I believe Bacon went down to the Great Hall to be there when they opened. He says the first waffles are the best ones. The curly-haired wizard chuckled ruefully and rubbed his blue eyes, then ran his hands through his dark brown hair. I've been meaning to ask you, you call them bacon and eggs, and your owl is marmalade. What's the fascination with breakfast? Finest meal of them all, don't you know? It's when they serve all the best stuff. Then the wizard's easygoing facade drops just a bit. It was our favorite time of the day. Me and Tavy. All Tiberius was never up before 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, so we could always count on breakfast being served in peace. Oh, was all Draco could say. Tavy had a stuffed creature. It was a penguin. Our governess gave it to her, if I recall correctly. Tavy named it Pancake because that was her favorite food. She would pretend to talk for Pancake all the time in this silly little Cockney accent. Go around introducing it to us, to the elves, to the trees in the garden, whatever. Hello, me name's Pancake. Oh, do ye do? She was so funny, silly sometimes, you know. I'm sorry, Theo. Draco looked down, picking at a bit of non-existent lint on his bedspread. Nothing to be sorry for, mate. All that's in the past. Theo sniffled just a bit, then continued. As far as I'm concerned, I have no reason to see that bastard ever again, unless we meet on the battlefield. I can assure you that this, Theo gestured to the letter on his nightstand, means nothing to me. I turned 17 in February, so I'll have access to my mother's inheritance. And I'm not going back there to that house ever again. That's good, Draco said truthfully, and a bit wistfully. Believe me, I envy it. Yeah, I know you do. Did it hurt when he did it? Theo's eyes dropped to Draco's arm. Yeah. It was bad. I'm pretty sure I blacked out at some point. It hurt for a few weeks after, still hurts sometimes, to be honest. Yeah, we've all been there before, Theo chuckled darkly. Draco only nodded. If anyone else in his life knew about the lasting aches and pains of abuse, both the physical and mental lasting pains, it was Theo. I think I'm going to need to beg off for the match today, Draco said finally, looking up at Theo. I'm just not up for it. Can you let Blaise know so he can tell Urquhart? Harper can stand in for me, he's dying to play anyway. I think I'll go and see if Pomfrey has anything for stomach upset. I'll let Urquhart know, Blaise said from his other side, where he was now lying awake listening to the end of their conversation. Thanks, mate. Oh. From his hospital bed, Draco could hear the commentary from the match. A Hufflepuff named Zacharias with an apparent grudge against Gryffindor was calling it. And Draco delighted in some of the jabs that he was getting in against Potter especially. It didn't matter in the end, however. Slytherin was flattened, 250-0. Pomfrey had given him a calming draft and a settling potion, then had forced him to stay in the hospital wing to monitor him for a few hours. So thankfully he hadn't seen the atrocity that was the Quidditch match in person. But he would have preferred to stay in the dormitory during that time. He was hoping that his mother might get a chance to flu call him. He knew that he was unable to call her because he could not be sure of finding her alone, especially now that Lucius was possibly back. He had already sent a letter to her with Thorn the night before, instructing the intelligent owl to only deliver the letter to Narcissa, and only if she was alone. He trusted the owl to follow the directions exactly. He only hoped that she would be able to write back quickly, or better yet, call him. He needed to know for certain if what those letters said was true. Were those prisoners out of Azkaban? Or was this simply a trick of Voldemort's to obtain more followers? Although it seemed that in the case of wizards like Vince and Greg, it wouldn't take trickery, merely an invitation. He knew that Hermione would wonder what had happened to him, why he'd decided not to play in the Quidditch match. So while Pomfrey was busy in her office, he took out his handkerchief to send her a message. "I hear congratulations are in order." Sounded from the hospital wing as though Harper shit the bed, that's for sure. "What are you doing in the hospital wing? Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. Just a bit of stomach upset. You know Madame Pomfrey, though. She wouldn't let me leave here without monitoring me for a while. I'm just about done here, though." He paused here, considering. He was a bit afraid to tell her about the letter, but it wasn't something he wanted to keep from her. He was already keeping so many secrets from her. "I got a letter saying that my father had escaped. I think it's possible that everyone that was rounded up from the Department of Mysteries is out again." It took a few minutes before a reply came. "Dolohov as well." He closed his eyes. Of course she would be worried about Dolohov, the brutish man that had nearly killed her. Would have done so if it hadn't been for her quick-thinking silencing spell. His father might hold a grudge for how Draco had always been bested by her, or for any number of other things. But Dolohov would likely be looking for payback for the months lost in Azkaban because of her. "I'm not sure. I doubt that the ministry or anyone in charge is going to make an announcement about it. I got a letter, supposedly from Lucius, saying that he was out. Theo, Blaise, Greg, and Vince also got one. They all read the exact same down to the salutation, none of them even referred to us or to them by name. Voldemort uses form letters. There's a name for those. Of course there is, Muggles are nothing if not efficient. Well then, yes, he does, or at least he has pedigree write them. I doubt the snake did. No opposable thumbs, you see. You're funny. Do you want me to come visit you in the hospital wing? It used to be our favorite meeting place, you know. I remember. I think the Quidditch pitch might have taken over, though. Seems like you mentioned freshly mown grass in your Mortentia. What else was it? Parchment den. Another pause, then her reply. If you must know, the third smell was one that is unique to you. There was spearmint, those lozenges you're always sucking on. But it was mixed with your cologne, your sweat, your skin. The third smell was just you. Draco felt his body grow warm with pleasure. I love you so much, my. Please don't ever forget it. How could I? But now, you've got an advantage. You know what was in my Amortentia, but you didn't tell me yours. Draco smiled as the memory of smelling the potion that day. Gardenias, cherry candy, and chocolate. And you? Your body, your scent. All of it mixed together. I wanted to bottle it up and douse myself in it. Oh my goodness. You certainly have a way with words. If you just said the word, I'd let you have your way with me. You are too much. Can you meet in about an hour? Gryffindor is having a party to celebrate our win, but Ron is sucking face with Lavender Brown, and it's getting to be quite a spectacle. It feels like he's trying to make me jealous. And to be honest, the idea of Dolohov and your father and the others being out of Azkaban, it's making my skin crawl. I want to get out of here. Draco hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want to meet. In fact, he had been hoping to have some time alone with her for some time now. But at her mention of Lucius and Dolohov, it brought home to him again how dangerous that being with him could be for her. It was one thing for the Death Eaters to think of her as Potter's mudblood, the muggle born at the top of the class, smartest witch of her age. But if they also knew that she was dating him, in love with him, pure blood heir to 2 ancient houses within the sacred 28, son and nephew of members of Lord Voldemort's inner circle, they wouldn't just kill her or crucio her. They would crucify her first. She would be tortured to within an inch of her life repeatedly. His panic and anxiety level shot up just thinking about it. Having her close to him only opened her up to more potential for harm from his family. He wasn't sure that he should allow her to do that. My Hermione, I care for you so much, but I'm wondering if we should take a break for a while. This business about my father, I don't want you to have a bigger target on your back. With what happened in the Department of Mysteries with Dolohov, and now Lucius being out, and the Dark Lord and Bellatrix living in my house, I'm just wondering if T's the best idea for us to be together right now. He sent the message before he could lose his nerve. And waited. The handkerchief turned cool, so he knew that she had received it. He waited still. His stomach knotted up in cramps again. This had been a mistake. How could he be so stupid, making such a rash decision? Tell me no, he thought. Tell me I'm being stupid, tell me that I'm wrong. But she told him nothing. After 30 minutes or so, Madame Pomfrey came to discharge him, and he was free to go. But he felt anything but free. Oh. That night, he dreamed of a most bizarre Quidditch match. The players were Voldemort Snake, Lucius wearing the cursed necklace, Hermione with a cruel sneer upon her face, and Madame Rosmerga trying to sell him love potions. The players kept flying in and out of the vanishing cabinet. And over it all, that annoying Hufflepuff was yelling into the magical microphone about how much of an asshole that Draco Malfoy was. Oh. The following Monday in Ancient Runes, Hermione had somehow gotten their partnership dissolved with Professor Babbling so that she could pair with the Hufflepuff Genevieve Whittaker, who'd been left partnerless after Katie's departure. He sat alone, working distractedly on their translation project, probably mistranslating a third of it and not caring. She would not look at him. She kept her eyes forward or else on her parchment unless she was talking to Genevieve. Her features were slightly red and puffy, as though she'd recently spent time crying. Her hair was fairly mutinous, with an occasional curl hurtling thither and yon, and he longed to go to her and tuck the errant coil back into place. But perhaps his early decision had been the right one. She didn't belong to him, and he could not belong to her. He was a poison in her drink, a thorn in her side. He would bring her down, and she could not possibly lift him up. His stomach tightened, and he rolled up the parchment, giving it up for the day. Oh. That evening in the room of hidden things, he was surprised by a tiny flock of yellow birds that seemed to travel around the room in a pack. Almost like a school of minnows in the lake behind the manor. They were new. He marveled once again at this amazing room that kept allowing in new things as people tried to get rid of them. The birds seemed highly interested in what he was doing, twittering about, landing in a row across the top of vanishing cabinet and nearby furniture, peering down at him curiously. At one point, one landed in his hair, beating its wings furiously, as though hoping to stir up a nest. It made him smile for the first time in days. It was almost like having friends. He continued to try different variations of his spell. He had decided that nectar was likely the proper verb. He had first assumed cosmido or lego would work better, but they did not appear strong enough. Nectar meant to connect, but also to weave or interlace, possibly making the binding stronger between the two sister cabinets. The birds seemed to agree when he asked them about it. He wondered if he was starting to crack up and go mad. The birds agreed with that too. He resolved to stop asking the birds their opinions. Oh. Chapter 57. Drafts, Death, Discussions, Dates, Dreams. For the rest of the week, Hermione avoided him whenever possible. She switched seats in arithmancy, and always took Potter with her to the library. Now that the weasel was preoccupied with examining Lavender's tonsils with his tongue, She and Potter seemed to be hanging out in the library far more often. They were already there when he entered on Thursday, firmly ensconced in what he thought of as her usual spot. The one at which he had been lucky enough to join her occasionally. She looked up at him, her stony glare quite clear. "You don't belong at this table. Go away." Her magic seemed to crackle from every surface. He gave them a wide berth, finding a table deeper in the stacks and settling himself. After a moment, he realized that he needed a book from the section of bookcases somewhat close behind her and Potter. Well, needed was a strong word. It was really more of a passing fancy. He moved quietly behind them, avoiding the piercing glare of Madame Pence as he perused the stack slowly, letting the titles pass across the surface of his brain like water over pebbles in a stream. But I thought all the owls were being searched, so how come these girls are able to bring love potions into school? Potter was whispering in a gravelly voice. Fred and George send them disguised as perfumes and cough potions. It's part of their owl order service. You know a lot about it, Potter said pointedly to her, as though she would need a love potion to have boys interested in her. Draco scoffed involuntarily, and then stilled suddenly as the pair of them turned his direction at the sudden noise. They turned back, apparently thinking it was Pence prowling nearby. It was all on the back of the bottles they showed Ginny and me in the summer. I don't go around putting potions in people's drinks. Or pretending to either, which is just as bad. This last bit she said very pointedly at Potter, and Draco wondered what Scarface had been up to with his newfound potions prowess. Come to think of it, where had he been getting all this knowledge? He barely scraped together and exceeds expectations for his OWL. In potions. But suddenly he was top in the class. That was suspicious, he thought. He refocused on their conversation. Filch is being fooled. These girls are getting stuff into the school disguised as something else, so why couldn't Malfoy have brought the necklace into the school? Draco held his breath. Harry, not that again. Hermione closed the book she was reading firmly as if to say the discussion was closed. He breathed again. Come on, why not? She huffed at him as though he was 6 years old. Look, secrecy sensors detect jinxes, curses, and concealment charms, don't they? They're used to find dark magic and dark objects. They'd have picked up a powerful curse, like the one on that necklace, within seconds. But something that's just been put in the wrong bottle wouldn't register, and anyway, love potions aren't dark or dangerous. So it would be down to Filch to realize it wasn't a cough potion, and he's not a very good wizard. I doubt he can tell one potion from. Draco dropped the book he was pulling down at random from the shelf. They both startled and looked back again at his position. A moment later, Pence was upon them, screaming about defilement and disgrace, bodily pushing them to the exit, howling about her precious books. Oh. Hermione was right, of course. Filch was a squib who didn't have magic in his arsenal to call upon for dark magic or poison detection. If he wasn't detecting items from the Weasley's shop because they looked like cough potions, he likely wasn't testing sealed things from shops like wine or spirits from the Three Broomsticks, for example. A flutter of excitement rose in his stomach. He might have a solution to this impossible task after all. He grinned to himself, then came to an abrupt realization. He'd just been contemplating the ease with which he could kill a man, celebrating the idea that he could make it easier to accomplish the ending of a life. He drew in a shuddering breath, nearly falling sideways, catching himself on a close-by shelf. He walked back to his table in a stupor. Without her knowing it, she had possibly helped him once more with this impossible task, he thought. Remembering with a pang of guilt that he'd used the idea of her Dumbledore's army coins to communicate with Roswitha. She'd told him about them on the train to Sandwich this past summer. She'd based the idea on their handkerchiefs. An idea they'd worked on together in the spirit of love and friendship. He packed his bag in a daze, walking silently past Pence's open office door, where the Wizened Witch sat pouring a double gin and pumpkin juice in a tall tumbler. Oh. Once outside the library, he hurried to the closest toilet, slamming and locking the door to the corridor behind him. He dropped his bag to the ground, slumped against the wall, and slid slowly down to the floor, elbows resting on his knees, hands at his temples. "What am I doing?" he whispered aloud, wishing for one of those little birds so that he could talk things over with it. "You tell me," a voice said from the stall across the way. A pearly ghost in glasses floated into the open area. "Hello, Myrtle," he greeted her listlessly, then sighed. "Sorry, sweet, I didn't mean to bother you again. This whole situation, though, it's just all so fucked. I don't know what to do." "Why don't you tell me about it?" Well, she was better than the birds. At least she answered back. "I've been given a task. I have to kill someone, and I don't think I can." He was surprised to find that the secrecy bond didn't seem to apply to the non-living. "I tried sending a cursed object and someone else got hurt. And I'm trying to fix this blasted fucking cabinet, but it's not working. And I've fucked everything up with Hermione, I don't know." The tears were starting to spill from his eyes, and he felt a cold brush of what felt like ice water, but dry, touch his cheek. Myrtle was trying to dry his eyes with her fingers. "It'll be okay. You are smart and kind-hearted, you can do whatever you have to do. I know you can. What did you do to mess things up with her?" Myrtle's last word was a bit prickly, as though she didn't think Hermione deserved him. "I told her we should take a break." Oh, Olive Hornby told her boyfriend that after graduation. He left for the Muggle Royal Army after that and got blown up in a forest in Germany. He's still there, you know. He looks ghastly, the glowing witch cackled a bit darkly. Draco's stomach lurched. He didn't know who any of those people were, but that this ghost could speak so flippantly about such a gruesome death was alarming. "Myrtle, I'm not trying to be rude, but this isn't helping. Well, I'm not much of an expert on boys and relationships. I'm only 14, you know, but I do know a thing or two about death. I don't think I can kill anyone, Myrtle. The good thing about somebody dying is that, if they're ready to go, they will go. What if they aren't ready? Then they get to stay here with me and keep me company. We can swim in the lake and play Quidditch without brooms, go in the prefect bath to play in the bubbles, and walk through people. So there really is no downside to death. Well, I suppose the bullies that like to throw things through you, but there's only a handful of those every year." As Draco left for the Slytherin common room, he tried to keep his mind focused on Myrtle's possibly misplaced confidence in his abilities. And on her assertion, but there was no downside in dying. He most definitely did not want to think about her spying on students in the prefect bath. Oh. Narcissa had finally messaged on Tuesday. Thorn brought the note to him at dawn, looking as though he'd flown all night through a rainstorm. He gathered a handful of treats for the loyal bird and summoned a towel to dry his ruffled feathers. Lucius was home. He was in rough shape, barely able to say more than a few words. He'd returned from Azkaban in a slightly better state. But after suffering the Cruciatus curse at the hand of the Dark Lord because of his failures at the ministry, his senses had been rattled. He was improving, but was unable to walk yet. Before he'd received the curse, he had been able to tell her that the others had also escaped with him. Draco wasn't sure how to feel. His father was a bastard, to be sure. He himself had dreamed of bringing the man down with a curse, or even just a punch to the face. Still, a part of him wondered if Lucius might have finally had a dose of his own medicine and learned something. Did he feel remorse that he'd condemned his son to this life? That he'd taken away any choice in the matter from Draco? Doubtful, Draco thought. Lucius had always looked at his son as his property, an object that would further Lucius's own reach, an extension of himself. Much like his wand or his bank vault. A few months in Azkaban and a couple of brushes with the Cruciatus curse wouldn't change that. Oh. It had been nearly a week since he had spoken with Hermione. He'd nearly taken out his handkerchief a dozen times to send her a note out of habit. He missed her not just as his girlfriend, but as his friend, his confidant. It had been a mistake, what he'd written to her, he knew it now. To be truthful, he'd known it the moment he'd said it. He'd been throwing out the baby dragon with the dragon eggshells, getting rid of the only good in his life just because there was a lot of bad in it. Yes, he still had this task, and the problem of his dark mark, none of that would change or go away, but he'd vowed to protect her. And he couldn't very well do that if he couldn't be close to her. He just wasn't sure that if he wrote, she'd even give him a chance by reading it. He didn't even know if she still carried her handkerchief with her. It needed to be face-to-face, but when and how? Oh. Friday's Transfigurations lesson was a difficult one. They were beginning human transfiguration, and everyone was struggling, although Draco wasn't putting in much effort. The weasel created a truly magnificent set of whiskers, completely on accident. They were meant to be changing the color of their eyebrows. Everyone near him laughed, but he chose Hermione out of all of them to get back at by poking fun at her. As he imitated her trying to get Professor McGonagall's attention to answer a question by bouncing in his chair. It was all Draco could do not to haul him up by the collar and shake him senseless. Lavender and Parvati joined in with his giggling, which angered Draco even more, seeing as Hermione now had tears shining in her eyes. Parvati had never struck him as cruel, especially to someone who was supposedly her friend. And as for Lavender, Draco was ready to give her a matching mustache to go with her ginger brat boyfriends if she kept it up. He didn't care that she was dating Weasley, but the blonde witch was coming between Hermione and the weasel. As much as Draco didn't understand it, he knew Hermione considered him a good friend, and she was torn up to not have Weasley in her life. Class ended, and Hermione grabbed up her jumper and unzipped book bag. Half the contents spilled from the back, but she just closed the open flap of the bag and hurried out. Draco saw Potter gathering up her things, so he decided to follow Hermione. She raced down the closest staircase and shoved her way through the crowd to the girls' toilet. Draco noticed that it was Myrtle's room, and reminded himself to seek her out later to find out how Hermione was. He ducked behind a nearby suit of armor as he saw Potter come down the stairs searching for her. Scarface seemed almost ready to give up finding her when Hermione emerged from the toilet, the arm of Luna Lovegood wrapped around her, patting her back as she walked. He couldn't overhear them from where he was, but it did not matter. Hermione took her things from Potter and rushed away quickly, barely speaking to the wizard. Draco eased out into the crowd, blending in a couple of people behind Potter and Luna, to overhear what they were saying. Thought at first it was Moaning Myrtle in there, but it turned out to be Hermione. She said something about that Ron Weasley, said Luna in a dreamy voice. Yeah, they've had a row, Potter offered. He says very funny things sometimes, doesn't he? But he can be a bit unkind. I noticed that last year. From the corner of his eye, Draco noticed Blaise falling into step next to him. He cocked an inquiring look at his friend, but Blaise merely placed a finger across his lips to ask for quiet, and inclined his head toward Potter and Luna, indicating that he was trying to listen. I suppose, Potter said, unsure. So have you had a good term? Oh, it's been all right. A bit lonely without the DA. Ginny's been nice, though. She stopped 2 boys in our Transfiguration class calling me loony the other day. How would you like to come to Slughorn's party with me tonight? The words came out of Potter's mouth at a bit of a rush. He immediately had a befuddled look on his face, as though he wasn't sure that it was he who had spoken. Slughorn's party? With you? Asked Luna. Yeah. We're supposed to bring guests, so I thought you might just as friends, you know, but if you don't want to. Oh, no, I'd love to go with you as friends. Nobody's ever asked me to a party before, as a friend. Draco felt a bit sad for her, but he didn't need to be any kind of seer to tell that she was incredibly excited. Draco and Blaise stopped walking and let Potter and Luna continue down the corridor. He turned to Blaise in confusion, taking in the other wizard's wide grin. What exactly just happened? I don't know what you mean, the dark-eyed wizard said innocently. I mean, it looked as though Potter had no idea that he was about to ask Luna to that party until he did. Thoughts? Not a one, Blaise said loftily. What did you do? Can you plant ideas in people's heads? A look of mild horror crossed Draco's face. Blaise said vehemently. Then, realizing that perhaps they were being a bit loud, he pulled Draco to the side of the corridor. He lowered his voice. As a lechelemens, I do have the ability to bring memories that are already in a person's mind to the forefront. I simply listened to his thoughts a bit. Granger has been encouraging him to get a date, and apparently he had a difficult time asking girls to go to the Yule Ball with him. I just put the two ideas together and brought up some positive memories of Luna. Potter did the rest. But if you want Lovewood to go to old Sluggy's party, why didn't you just ask her yourself? I thought you were already dating, to be honest. What gave you that idea? Didn't you visit her in the hospital wing after that night in the Department of Mysteries? Only as a friend. She sees me as a friend. Draco detected a bit of longing there, but wisely didn't poke at it. You've dated plenty of witches, it can't be that hard to get Loony Lovewood to go out with you. Do not call her that. Blaze's anger was immediate. Then he calmed down a bit. Luna is special. She intimidates me. And to be honest, tales of my conquests are somewhat inflated. Draco cocked an eyebrow at him. Really? So you haven't betted every 7th-year girl and half the boys too? No. Only 9/10 of them. Blaze grinned at him. Pratt, Draco said laughingly. Oh. Later that day, mulling over all that he had witnessed between Hermione, Luna, Potter, and Blaze, he thought more about Professor Slughorn's party. Hermione had mentioned that she would ask Ron as a friend, but that was before Weasley started playing spit Quidditch with Lavender. Draco guessed that Lavender would not allow the weasel to walk across the room with Hermione, much less go to a fancy party. Not to mention, Hermione did not seem happy with the weasel as of late anyway. Draco had assumed that this meant she would ask Potter to go, but she had been encouraging Potter to get a date for the party, and now, of course, Potter had one in Luna. So, would Hermione go alone? One thing was for certain, she wouldn't be going with him. Even if they had been speaking at the moment, she wouldn't have been able to go with him. But as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't help but let his mind wander daydreaming about the party. He could go with Blaze and Hermione would be there alone. He could offer her a dance, seeing as they were both without a date, and perhaps no one would think anything of it. Draco fell asleep that night dreaming of another life, a simpler one where it didn't matter what house you were in, or who your friends were. It didn't matter who your father was or what your blood status was. It could just be them, the two of them. They could be themselves, build their own world, have control of their own futures. When he woke the next morning, for a brief moment, he was thankful for such a nice dream. Good dreams had been so hard to come by lately. So often his sleep was filled with nightmares. Then, realization set inches of all the dreams he'd had, even the fantastic ones with dragons and cursed necklaces and dead birds. The one least likely to come true was the one from last night. Oh. Chapter 58, Partying, Prowling, Prying. Saturday at lunch, Draco was surprised to see Hermione in high spirits. Draco watched closely as she spoke happily with the recently traitorous Parvati and Lavender. The weasel looked especially upset. Draco was pleased to see. What was she up to? Blaze, mate. Draco tugged on the sleeve next to him, whispering quietly. He cast a muffling charm around them. Can you do me a small favor? Can you tell me what Hermione is thinking about? You're asking me to spy on your witch. What is wrong with you? It just seems like something is up. I'm only curious. Why don't you just ask her? We were all taking a break from each other. Blaze whistled softly. I take it that it wasn't exactly mutual. What makes you say that? Well, you've both looked like shit for the last week or so. Draco sighed. I just thought with all of the stuff going on, with what I've been asked to do, and then our fathers. Hermione left the Great Hall and Draco slumped in his seat. But you're the same person that you were before the escape. And your feelings didn't change. I get that she doesn't know about the mark or whatever you're supposed to be doing. But she knows you're keeping things from her, and she's accepted it that it's not your choice. So why break up with her now? It was kind of a spur-of-the-moment idea. I was just thinking in my head of all these worst-case scenarios and I panicked and thought she would be better off without me dragging her down. He lowered his head. I've changed my mind, but I can't tell her in a note. I want to do it face-to-face. But every time I've gotten close to her, she rushes away like she's got somewhere else to be. If it's any consolation, she still loves you, Drake. You got that from her thoughts. No, mate, I can see it on her face. Oh. Draco spent the rest of Saturday afternoon in the library, determined to find the correct verbiage for the passageway spell. But nothing seemed likely. The afternoon dragged on. He should have spent time in the room of requirement working on the cabinet, but could not bring himself to do so. Perhaps he would do it while everyone else was at the Slug Club Christmas party. Blaze had already asked a 7th-year girl named Coraline to go, so Draco wasn't able to go as his +1. Apparently, Coraline had a huge crush on Anthony Goldstein and was hoping to get him alone at the party. Theo was also going, as a guest of Tracy Davis. Greg and Vince had detention assigned by Snape for easily the 6th time this term and could not stand guard for him. But he felt like Saturday night would be safe to go it alone. Draco knew that the party was set to begin around the same time as regular dinner in the Great Hall. And he wondered who Hermione ended up choosing as her date. He'd thought it would be Potter, but Blaze had ensured that the Specky Wizard would be bringing Luna. Perhaps she'd bring Longbottom, Draco mused as he made his way up the staircase from the dungeons. The entrance hall was filled with partygoers in various colorful holiday dresses and robes. He caught sight of Luna wearing an audacious sparkling silver dress and exchanged amused glances with Theo at the sight. Then the crowd shifted and parted slightly, revealing Hermione. It was Yule Ball all over again. Her hair was swept back and then over one shoulder, a single peacock feather pinned to the curls. Her dress was tied at the top and cut lower than any other Muggle clothing he had ever seen her wear. The skirt flounced out at the hem, which stopped a few inches above her knee. A sheer stole wrapped around her shoulders and rested in the crooks of her arms. Her kitten heel shoes had sparkling crystals on each toe. The entire outfit was emerald green. Draco stared, breathless at her beauty. It was like Yule Ball, yes, but devastatingly worse. Because now he had seen her, had known her, had tasted her. And he knew exactly what he was missing. She turned and found herself looking right at him. She gasped, reflexively drawing a hand to her chest in surprise at the sight of him. He lifted his hand and touched his chest, where she knew he kept his handkerchief. She pursed her lips, then seemed to find her resolve. She touched her wrist briefly, but no handkerchief was there. The outfit had no sleeves for her to carry it in, but Draco took the gesture as a step in the right direction. Cormac McLaggen stepped in front of her, blocking Draco's view. A moment later, he turned, and Hermione had her left hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, smiling up at him. It took everything Draco had in him not to hex him on the spot. Fuck dinner. Fuck this dumb party. Fuck all of this. Oh. He turned back to the dungeons, greeted in the common room by Ivanovich and Harper, who were setting up for poker and fire whiskey. They invited him to join in, but he begged off. After 15 minutes of lying on his bed, feeling sorry for himself, having an imaginary dick measuring contest with Cormac McLaggen and coming out the winner and beating the wizard to a pulp for good measure, Draco returned to the Great Hall and forced himself to eat something. Then he hurried up the stairs to the room of hidden things. Oh. It was quiet. Perhaps a bit too quiet. Where were the birds? He opened a few cabinets and boxes, turning over a basket here and there, looking for them. They usually gathered around what he now thought of as his cabinet, but tonight he couldn't find them. He made a clicking sound with his mouth. A feeble chirp to his right drew him to a tall chest of drawers that somebody apparently thought might look beautiful, painted with bright orange and green stripes. The top drawer was opened a crack. Opening the drawer more, he located their nest. But something was wrong. They looked tired, lethargic. You need food, he said, both as a question and a statement. Why hadn't the room provided food? Then he remembered the exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, one of which stated that food could not be conjured from nothing. Water could, however, so Draco found a large bowl with a chip near the top, filling it with water. I'll be right back, he told them. Exiting the room, he paused. Where was he going? And what did birds eat, anyway? He was rooted to the spot with indecision, torn between the library to research ornithology and Hagrid's hut to ask advice. When Argus Filch rounded the corner, flapping his way toward Draco, jowls quivering in glee. "Students out of bed!" he shouted at Draco. Draco tried to explain that he was a sixth year and did not have to be in his common room until 11 o'clock, but Filch would have none of it. In desperation, Draco claimed that he was on his way to Slughorn's Christmas party and was only just heading that way. "Well, by all means, let us go together and see what the good professor says," Filch drawled with glee. Grabbing Draco's upper arm in a surprisingly strong pincer grip, Filch set off down the corridor, pushing Draco in front of him. Oh. They reached the party and Draco flushed with embarrassment. Hermione, Cormac McLagan, Blaise, Theo, even Potter now had a front row view to his immense shame and embarrassment. An uninvited guest trotted out upon the carpet for public flogging. Professor Slughorn was gracious enough, welcoming him despite his lack of invitation. "It's nothing. I didn't know your grandfather, after all," Professor Slughorn said generously. "He always spoke very highly of you, sir. Said you were the best potion maker he'd ever known," said Draco to Professor Slughorn, who preened drunkenly under the praise. As Abraxas had seldom spoken to Draco directly, he felt that this statement was just as likely true as it was likely false. Draco was looking around, studiously avoiding Hermione's eye, knowing how downtrodden he likely looked. He had spent nearly every day either skulking in the library or languishing in the room of requirement. He had skipped meals, had tossed and turned more nights than not in the last week or so. He knew that the robes he wore were wrinkled from where he had laid on his bed before dinner. In short, he looked nothing like the tall, curly-haired blonde wizard that she'd come with to the party. He resolved to find some crackers or a bit of fish for the birds, and then leave as quickly and unobtrusively as he could. "I'd like a word with you, Draco," said Professor Snape suddenly at his side. "Follow me." "Oh." Snape swished his way down the corridor, black robes billowing behind him. Draco swiped a few hors d'oeuvres from a passing tray carried by a house elf and followed at a short distance, feeling like a small child about to be punished. Professor Snape pushed open the door of the last classroom on the corridor, gesturing him inside and closing the door behind them. "I do not know what game you are playing at, Draco, but time is getting short. You know that the Dark Lord expects you to succeed. Failure is not an option, yet so far that is all you have produced, what with that silly necklace trick. You cannot afford mistakes, Draco, because if you are expelled." "I didn't have anything to do with it, all right." Draco spat out, not meeting the professor's eyes. "Syrup of hellebore. Crushed valerian root. Cracked moonstones. I hope you are telling the truth, because it was both clumsy and foolish. Already you are suspected of having a hand in it." "Who suspects me?" "For the last time, I didn't do it, okay? That Belle girl must have had an enemy no one knows about." Professor Snape looked him deeply in the eyes, and Draco felt the potions cupboard in his mind shift and rattle slightly. "Don't look at me like that. I know what you're doing. I'm not stupid, but it won't work. I can stop you." Draco brought forth images in his mind. Quidditch practices with Blaise and the team, swimming in the lake behind the manor, riding the Hogwarts Express with Vince and Greg, patrolling the school with the rest of the inquisitorial squad. Aunt Bellatrix has been teaching you occlumency, I see. What thoughts are you trying to conceal from your master, Draco? Draco's axis tilted slightly. He had worked a bit more, refining and honing his occlumency on his own. Did Snape really think that Bellatrix had a hand in teaching him anything? He pushed sudden thoughts of her away and solidified his walls again. And did Snape truly assume that because he had this awful mark upon his arm that he considered Voldemort his master? Draco fought sudden sadness at the thought. He had always liked Snape, trusted him. That Snape thought he was so easily swayed, it hurt more than Draco wanted to admit to himself. "I'm not trying to conceal anything from him, I just don't want you butting in." He bit out at Snape. Professor Snape leaned in close to him. "So that is why you have been avoiding me this term. You have feared my interference. You realize that, Had anybody else failed to come to my office when I had told them repeatedly to be there? Draco. So put me in detention. Report me to Dumbledore. Draco watched for a reaction from his professor. With whom, exactly, did Snape's true allegiance lie? You know perfectly well that I do not wish to do either of those things, Snape said quietly. You'd better stop telling me to come to your office then. Listen to me, said Professor Snape. I am trying to help you. I swore to your mother I would protect you. I made the unbreakable vow, Draco. Draco sucked in a breath. Was this where his mother had gone that night? The night after he had gotten this task from Voldemort. She had said she was going for help, going to find a way to get him out of this. Could it be true? But how? What kind of unbreakable vow had Snape made with his mother? Did his mother also make a vow? Had she promised her life in exchange for his protection? He had to get out of this room, get away from this wizard. He would carry out this mission, protect his mother, and keep everyone he loved safe. Looks like you'll have to break it, then, because I don't need your protection. It's my job. He gave it to me and I'm doing it. I've got a plan and it's going to work. It's just taking a bit longer than I thought it would. What is your plan? It's none of your business. If you tell me what you are trying to do, I can assist you. I've got all the assistance I need, thanks. I'm not alone. You were certainly alone tonight, which was foolish in the extreme, wandering the corridors without lookouts or backup. These are elementary mistakes. I would have had Crabbe and Goyle with me if you hadn't put them in detention. Keep your voice down. If your friends Crabbe and Goyle intend to pass their defense against the dark arts OWLS this time around, they will need to work a little harder than they are doing at present. What does it matter? Defense against the dark arts, it's all just a joke, isn't it? An act. Like any of us need protecting against the dark arts. Certainly, defensive spells were not what Vince and Greg planned to use once they became members of Lord Voldemort's army. It is an act that is crucial to success, Draco, snapped Snape. Where do you think I would have been all these years, if I had not known how to act? Draco stared at Snape in disbelief. He was admitting, then, that his service to Dumbledore had all been an act. Or was it the other way around? Now listen to me, his professor continued. You are being incautious, wandering around at night, getting yourself caught. And if you are placing your reliance in assistants like Crabbe and Goyle. Draco bristled, thinking of all the help he'd gotten from all corners, inadvertent and otherwise. They're not the only ones, I've got other people on my side, better people. Then why not confide in me, and I can help, Snape said. I know what you're up to. You want to steal my glory. Or turn me over to the Order, Draco thought. He still wasn't sure which. Snape was too much of an enigma. Snape lowered his face into his palms. Rubbing his eyes blearily for a moment, he said, You are speaking like a child. I quite understand that your father's capture and imprisonment has upset you, but… Draco threw up his hands and stormed from the room, clutching the napkin-wrapped hors d'oeuvres in his pocket. He had other things to take care of, creatures that needed him right now. Better things to do than have a long discussion with Snape. It was like arguing with a shadow. Snape was too much of a mystery to pin down. The fact that he still believed then Draco was so enamored with Lucius, the way he had been as a child, was laughable. The sheer intensity and quantity of Draco's worries these days far exceeded his concern for Lucius. He felt like a circus performer at the little circus in Bruges all those years ago, a man who levitated a series of thin sticks in the air, balancing plate after cup after dish after spoon on each of the stick's tips. With each new addition, the audience gasped and whooped in amazement. At once both worried and hopeful that the entire collection would fall in a terrific clatter. Draco only hoped he could shield everyone he loved from the fallout. Chapter 59. The New Year. The birds had perked back up when presented with the handful of hors d'oeuvres from Slughorn's party that Draco had been able to sneak to them. Back in his dormitory, he had called Dobby, explaining where to find the nest in the ugly chest of drawers. When Draco entered the room of hidden things the next morning, the birds were back in full force, twittering and swooping overhead as though nothing were amiss. Draco had stayed awake long after he had returned to the dormitory, thinking. There was an unbreakable vow made, this much he knew. Generally speaking, an unbreakable vow was naturally imbued by a bond of secrecy. The terms of the vow were not able to be discussed outside of the company of the vow takers and the bonder. It was just as well Snape could keep his secrets and Draco would keep his. One useful thing had come from the conversation the previous night, however. Snape had reminded him that time was getting short and failure was not an option as far as the Dark Lord was concerned. Draco knew that the necklace debacle had been a mistake, but he needed to move forward on his backup plan, just in case the vanishing cabinet could not be repaired. Recalling the conversation upon which he had eavesdropped between Potter and Hermione in the library, Draco removed the coin from his pocket that he used to communicate with Madame Rosada. Mr. Borgin will be sending you a package containing a vial soon. The next time that Horace Slughorn enters your pub, you will give him a bottle of your finest Christmas mead. Suggest to him that he gives it to Dumbledore as a Christmas present. Before you seal the bottle, you will empty into it the vial of. Oh. His mother was able to offer his regrets to their house guests that Draco was unable to come home Christmas, owing to his status as prefect. She had only managed one flu call to him so far during the holiday break, and it was painfully short and rather devoid of cheerful holiday tidings. She reported that Lucius was able to stand and take a few steps unaided. His vocabulary had somewhat recovered, but not his voice. He spoke mostly in a low whisper these days, and still did not speak very much. But he was eating normally, and was using his cane to take slow laps around the garden. So Narcissa felt confident that he would recover completely soon. Draco could not be arsed to care. Bellatrix, Peter, Voldemort, and the snake still lived primarily at Malfoy Manor, though Bellatrix sometimes remembered that she had a manor and husband of her own, and disappeared for a few days at a time to check in with Rodolphus. When Draco asked Narcissa about the unbreakable vow she'd made with Snape, she would only say that it had been important. Narcissa told him about the occasional dinners that Voldemort had instituted to bring together his various followers. The meals nearly always included the Gr8t siblings, who sounded both stupid and horrid: Selwyn, Travers, Nott, Goyle, Yaxley, and Dolohov. Fenrir Greyback and Rodolphus and Rabaston Lestrange joined occasionally as well. Draco's teeth clenched at the mention of Dolohov. He did not know the wizard well, but he knew that he hated him. Narcissa asked about his friends, and he said that he'd be spending the holidays with Theo and Blaise. She had looked at him pointedly, nodding and raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Go on." He merely shook his head no slightly, leaving it at that. Narcissa nodded curtly, as though she had expected no different, but had whispered to him, "It will be all right, my dragon. You will work things out." Oh. Christmas was rather bleak. He, Theo, and Blaise were the only Slytherins to stay behind at Hogwarts. A handful of other students from other houses had as well, but the vast majority had gone home to their families, as the populace was fearful of the situation with Voldemort and preferred to keep their loved ones close. Blaise and Theo at least were in good spirits. Not having to spend the holidays with abusive parents would do that, Draco supposed. Apparently Professor Slughorn's party had been a success for Blaise and his date, as the date had left with Anthony Goldstein, and Luna had left with Blaise once Potter ditched her. Theo was in a good mood because he'd received a box of Muggle treats from Eliza, as the Owl Mail office in Hogsmeade was able to send and accept boxes to and from the Royal Mail. He had sent her a few of the more benign items from Honeydukes and in return had received canisters of Muggle crisps, wine gums, and various other sugary concoctions. He had told her that the stores near them did not sell those items, so she had been glad to send them. She had also included a few intimate pictures of herself, which Theo had promptly hidden away in his trunk. He threatened to hex the bollocks off of anyone who tried to find them. Draco worked on the vanishing cabinet, focusing his attention on wand movements. He wasn't sure yet about the incantation, but felt confident that it would come to him. Christmas came and went with the usual crackers and succulent feasts. Draco took mild pleasure in the buttery soft dragonhide gloves that his mother had given him. Blaise had gifted him a new game for his Game Boy that he seldom had a chance to play anymore. Theo gave him a book entitled, "What Witches Want," that was both instructive and preposterous. Looking at some of the advice and descriptions within, Draco was intrigued and a bit apprehensive. Then he reminded himself that he had no witch with whom to try these wooing techniques, and he tossed the book in a drawer in his nightstand in resignation. He had gone back and forth on whether or not to send her a gift. Finally, however, he decided to trust his gut and his heart. He chose a charm of gold with tiny amethyst flowers of purple hyacinth. In Victorian flower language, it meant "I'm sorry, please forgive me." Oh. Term was set to resume January 6th and students began returning to the school on the 4th. He saw her in the entrance hall just before dinner on the evening of the 4th. She was radiant in the torchlight as always, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked at him not with anger in her eyes, but neutrality. It was the best he could hope for under the circumstances. He touched his breast pocket, and after a moment hesitation, she touched her cuff. Both the Slytherin and Gryffindor tables were sparsely populated. Hermione ate opposite Neville, who noticed the brief but meaningful glances between them. As the meal wound down, Hermione was the first of the two of them to leave. Neville ambled over to the Slytherin table, stopping near Draco's seat. "Seems like you cocked things up big time, Malfoy," Neville offered by way of greeting. "Yes, I did," Draco sighed, "not sure what I was thinking." "Doesn't look much like you were thinking. There's just a lot to be going on with. I hate the thought of her being in the middle. Do you really expect a witch like that to stay on the sidelines? She's Hermione Granger, she's always going to be in the middle of things. She petrified me at the age of 12 so that she could help save the Philosopher's Stone from you-know-who. Believe me, she's not just going to sit around and wait on you to get your shit together." "You're right." Draco huffed a long exhale. "When the hell did you get so smart, Longbottom?" "I've always been smart. It's like I told you back in first year, Malfoy. I'm worth 12 of you." The Gryffindor wizard gave him a half-smile and ambled out of the great hall. "He's right, you know," Theo said. "What? That he's worth 12 of me?" Draco scoffed lightly. "MMM. Well, maybe that too. But no, I meant that she's not going to wait around while you dick about. You need to fix this sooner rather than later." "Yeah, I know. I will." Theo turned seriously to him. "One last question, though. When did you become friends with Neville Longbottom?" "Oh." He found her where else? She was perusing the bookcases on charms, likely getting an early start on their spring term assignments. "Hi," he said uncertainly. "Our Happy New Year." "To you as well." May I explain?" He kept his hands in the pockets of his trousers, eyes on the floor. He was afraid that if he took his hands out, he would reach out for her and scare her away. "Certainly." She had yet to look away from the bookcase. He leaned back on the wooden support of the case, facing her even as she stared at the books beside him. He cast his strongest Muffliato charm. "I thought I was doing it to protect you. You know my father has always had you in his sights, and I was afraid that I was making the target on you bigger by being with you. And now? I realize that I can't protect you from afar, and that my father is less of a threat than Bellatrix or Voldemort, and that we're stronger together than we could ever be apart. You and I have come up with some amazing things over the years. This is proof right here," he said, touching his pocket where his handkerchief lay. "I have no doubt that there are difficult things ahead. You know there are things that I can't." The secrecy bond strangled his words. His hand reached for his throat before relaxing. "Can't say. But there is one thing, and it's a big one, that you need to know. I'm sorry to have kept it from you. I was so ashamed of it." At this, his voice broke and fast, hot tears springing into his eyes and cascaded down his cheeks almost before he was aware of them. He batted them away quickly. They were getting in the way of what he needed to say to show her. "Before that, though, I need you to know how sorry I am. I realized my mistake immediately, and I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't do it in a note. I had to do it face to face. But I wouldn't let you get close to me," she added. "I didn't try hard enough. I didn't think you would. Well, after you see, I don't know that you will accept me anymore." "What are you talking about, Draco? I love you." It was her turn for tears. He reached out as if to wipe them away, but pulled back. "You may not want me to touch you. You will hate me." "Draco, I can't hate." "You will, Hermione," he insisted. "I hate myself every time I look in the mirror." She reached for him, then taking his hands softly, holding them between her own. Will you tell me what is going on? Her copper eyes swam with her tears, her features blurring as his own tears welled in his eyes. He pulled his hands free, taking his left cuff and unbuttoning it with his right hand. She gasped nearly as soon as he touched the buttons. He rolled his sleeve up slowly, keeping his arm turned downward until the last. It had not seemed to matter. He kept his eyes on her face the entire time, and from the moment his fingers had unbuttoned the cuff, she seemed to know. Her tears came harder now, features crumpled in disbelief and hurt. No. No. Draco, oh no. She collapsed to the ground, hugging her body tightly as though trying to keep the intense magic inside of herself. She leaned against the bookcase, looking up at him. How? When? But the tongue-blocking secrecy curse prevented him from sharing any details. He touched his throat to indicate that to her. Then he sank down onto the balls of his feet next to her. Secrecy bond, she whispered. Was it that night, the night you had to go to his ancestral home? Yes, he whispered fearfully, afraid of what the bond might do to him in just revealing this small piece of information. But apparently, the bond only prevented him from speaking about it, not from confirming others' questions about it. He breathed a sigh of relief as fresh tears fell from his eyes. Harry thought you might have had to do this to take Lucius's place in the circle. I tried to tell him no, that you wouldn't have to do that you were too young. They took my mother. The day before. I didn't know how to get her back without going there, he thought, but the bond would not let him say it. And I was so afraid that if I refused, they would torture me. My occlumency is good, but I was afraid that against the two of them, for an extended time under the Gr8t curse, it would break and they would be able to see you, everything. His voice broke again on the last words. They both sat in silence for a quiet moment, each living their own personal anguish of the last several months. Maisiev? She asked. He realized that, with all their discussion, he had not actually shown it to her, keeping it turned away from her the whole time. Hesitantly, he turned his arm upward, showing it to her. The mark was black, deep within the skin, but the skin around it was still red, angry and inflamed. In places, it looked as though his body had tried to heal it over, only to have the mark fight back and grow thicker. It looks as though your body is trying to reject it, she sniffled. Body, mind, soul. None of us wants it, he choked. He rolled the sleeve down carefully over the mark, still a bit tender even 5 months later. She smiled piteously. He sank down to sit next to her back against the bookcases. I'm sorry, he said, for not showing you sooner. In the beginning, soon after I was in denial about it, could not believe everything that was happening, and then I was just so ashamed. I understand. His breath caught in his chest. You do? Yes. I know it wasn't your choice. You are not your father, Draco. Her voice was quavering but clear. Thank you. Will you give me another chance? He asked. They sat there a moment, facing one another, eyes only inches apart. He leaned forward gently and brushed his lips to hers. She allowed the contact, leaning forward slightly herself, but then pulled back. I am not saying no. I need a day or so to think it all through. Okay. Take as long as you need. It's been 5 months, and I'm still thinking through everything that's happened since this summer. But I know your brain works faster than mine, so a day sounds about right. She snorted quickly with laughter, covering her mouth in embarrassment and causing him to laugh as well. I've missed this so much, I've missed you, he said, his voice cracking on the last word. He hurriedly wiped at the tear attempting to fall on his cheek. She removed her hands from his and stood. He clambered to his feet after her. I've missed you too, Draco, she said. Her copper eyes flashed brightly at his silver ones, and she turned to go. Oh. As he fell into bed that night, it occurred to him that it had been a holiday season with something to celebrate after all. She knew one of the worst secrets he had, and she hadn't hexed him into oblivion as he'd expected. He lay awake, listening to Blaze turning the pages of a Muggle magazine while Theo played Draco's new game on the Game Boy. The lyrics to one of his and his mother's favorite Christmas carols came into his mind. Gr8t, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Draco could only hope that would hold true. Chapter 60. The Breakfast Club. The following morning, he was awoken at 6 o'clock by a warmth against his pillow, where he typically laid his handkerchief in case Hermione wrote during the night. It was the first time that it warmed against his skin in weeks, and it was as though his body was waiting for it. His eyes popped open, senses alight. I was hoping to go down and meet Hagrid for breakfast. Can we meet later this morning? He wrote back. Do you mind if I join you too? There was a long moment before her response. I don't know. I didn't think well. I suppose if you promise to be nice. If I'm a guest in someone's home, Hermione, I would be unfailingly polite. Well, I suppose it would be all right. Draco smiled to himself. Hermione had no idea that he and Hagrid had been friendly since first year. What are you over there giggling about? Theo naturally was awake, likely already done with the Prophet's Sunday morning crossword puzzle. Oh, just thinking about heading down to Hagrid's for breakfast. I'd invite you along, but Hermione is coming, so bugger off and all that. I take it you won't be clabber-letting with Hermione, then? Theo asked with a smirk. Oh. Over the winter break, Hagrid had approached Draco, his only Newt student to stay behind at the castle for Christmas with a special project. It seemed that Slughorn was experimenting with a detection potion, and clabbert pustules, found on the heads of clabberts, were excellent natural detectors of danger. As the Forbidden Forest was full of them this time of year, Hagrid hoped to catch 100 or so and let the pustules. This would make about 25 vials of potion. As Draco was also a Newt student in potions, the two professors had volunteered Draco for both collecting and harvesting of the pustule fluid. Draco, being an excellent friend, had roped his two best mates into the adventure. They'd set off with Hagrid and Fang around dusk a week or so before, just after Christmas. Draco was grumbling about being in the Forbidden Forest at night yet again. But Hagrid had assured them that it would make finding the glowing pustules far easier. While Draco was inclined to agree, it didn't make him feel any better. Particularly after thinking about the 17 to 22 acromantulas living in the forest. They had found the first nest of clabberts quickly, gathering them into the basket they had at the ready. But at the second nest, they were surprised by an angry cluster of bowtruckles. Draco and Theo were bitten immediately, and their outraged howls of pain set Fang off. The fearful dog took off at a run in the wrong direction, sending Hagrid barreling after him. Blaise had unceremoniously announced that he was getting the fuck out of there, and Theo was inclined to agree. But Draco knew that doing that would leave Hagrid with collecting the remaining clabberts alone after he'd found his cowardly dog. Draco wandered the forest alone for 2 more hours, occasionally diving into bushes to avoid a brush with the centaurs, or taking a less traveled path so that some Thistrels in a clearing ahead would not smell the dried blood from his bowtruckle bite. The third and fourth clabbert nests were guarded by angry Cornish pixies, and the fifth held only the babies, which were too small and underdeveloped for pustule-letting. Hagrid finally found him at the sixth nest, telling him that Fang had run straight to Gr8t, and his brother had been in such a chatty mood that Hagrid had had a hard time getting away. The actual pustule-letting took another 2 hours, at which point Draco's hands were glowing red from the fluids. In spite of his thick dragon hide work gloves, Hagrid could tell that Draco was distracted and upset, and not just about the bowtruckle bites. After a bit of questioning from Hagrid, Draco admitted to having witch troubles in addition to his well-known and well-publicized family difficulties. While Hagrid did not know that Lucius had escaped, everyone knew that Bellatrix was on the loose with Voldemort. Hagrid had no advice about Bellatrix, but he was quick to offer witch advice, seeing as he was in a long-distance relationship with Madame Maxime. Communication was key, he said. And keeping your family out of your relationship. Draco was inclined to agree on both counts. They had released all of the clabberts back into the forest around 1 o'clock in the morning. Draco was awoken at 5 p.m. to the braying laughter of Thea at the sight of his brightly glowing hands. He'd endured several jokes asking if anything else was glowing too after he'd returned from the toilet. So, in answer to Theo's question, no, he and Hermione would not be clabbert-letting together today. Oh. They met in the entrance hall at 7, and Hermione looked as nervous as he felt. Even though it was very early on a weekend holiday morning. There were a few younger students and more than a few faculty and staff already in the Great Hall for breakfast. The two of them were seldom seen together outside of a couple of classrooms. So for them to be setting off across the grounds together was a bit unusual. Add in the fact that they were trying to re-establish a relationship, and their nerves were obvious. He approached and greeted her cordially. He noticed Neville loitering nearby, and greeted him as well. Hermione's eyebrows raised a bit as the two wizards nodded to each other briefly with nary a hex in sight. "Shall we go?" he said as he gestured to the front doors. "Let's," she murmured, walking ahead of him. They walked several feet apart until they had dropped below the crest of the hill, mostly out of sight of the castle. Then Hermione moved a bit towards him, tentatively taking the fingers of his right hand in her left. He grasped her cold hand in his warm one firmly. She dropped their intertwined hands as she knocked on Hagrid's door. "Aye, Hagrid," she said uncertainly. "I know it's a bit of an imposition, but Malfoy was wondering if he might join us as well." She looked stiff and nervous, as if the very idea would have Hagrid bellowing in anger. Hagrid's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline, then a half-smile appeared on his face. "Why sure, Hermione. That sounds miggy fine. Welcome, Draco." Draco thanked him and busied himself patting Fang in greeting and fixing a large mug of tea, much to Hermione's unspoken surprise. "Looks like the clabberpustule glow finally went away," Hagrid said. "It took a while." "Spread a bit, too, if I'm being honest," Draco laughed. Hagrid's eyes slid to Draco's profile, over to the silent Hermione, and then back again. "And I take it your witch troubles have been resolved." Draco smiled down at the sugar bowl. "The Wisengamot is still deliberating, but I like my chances. So, what's on for breakfast?" Draco looked to the cooktop. "Oh, little of this, little of that. Feeling like some eggs this morning?" Hagrid asked. "Are they chicken eggs?" he asked tentatively. Hagrid smiled in amusement. "Course." "From a chicken." Draco raised an eyebrow at him. "From near a chicken." There was a moment of silence, then both wizards laughed uproariously. Hermione stood near the door, mouth agape, looking from one to the other in complete confusion. "Sorry," she interrupted, "but just what the fuck is going on here?" "Oh." Breakfast was nearly done by the time Draco and Hagrid had finished telling Hermione of their random moments together over the years. "So you actually visited Norbert? And Buckbeak, why didn't you ever tell me?" Draco looked down at his oversized cup of tea in shame. "I felt so challenged by you and Potter back then, and I was ashamed. My father was trying to sack Hagrid, fighting to kill the Hippogriff, and he hated you. To you and half the school, I was enemy number one. I mean, you and your mates thought I was the heir of Slytherin and even tried to get me to admit it to you." Hermione stilled. She hitched in a breath and asked, "Who told you that?" "Oh, just an eyewitness who still wants to know exactly what happened to your whiskers and tail," he drawled in amusement. "You're friends with Myrtle, too." She fairly shrieked at Draco. "You had whiskers and a tail," Hagrid demanded of Hermione. "Oh." They left around mid-morning, full from a breakfast that they could mostly identify. It had been a fun and interesting morning, and Hermione was still shaking her head in disbelief at everything she'd learned. "Would you like to come to my room?" Draco asked as they made their way back to the castle. Noticing her blush, he corrected himself. No, I didn't mean I'm sorry. I just thought it might be nice to talk in private, and with term starting tomorrow and people beginning to trickle back later this afternoon, I know all of our usual places will begin to fill up. I never did get to see the Slytherin common room back in second year, and I was really looking forward to it. Bathilda Bagshot wrote about the unique entrance, and I remember Harry talking about being able to see into the lake from below the surface. It sounded amazing. Well, let's go. I'll get Theo and Blaze to clear the common room as you're going through. We've only had 2 other Slytherins show up for the new term yet, anyway. It turned out that assistance wasn't needed from Theo and Blaise, as the common room was empty when Draco checked it. Hermione entered, marveling at the stone wall entrance, which only appeared when the current passphrase, "Live long and prosper," was uttered. "How is the passphrase chosen?" she asked with a barely repressed chuckle. "There's a chalice on the mantle where we can submit suggestions, and at the beginning of each month, the 7th year prefects choose a new passphrase from those ideas. I still remember one spring when Marcus Flint and Xander Higby were still here. We all had to say, 'I want to dip my balls in it.' Do you know who submitted the current passphrase?" "I think Blaise did. He's always coming up with these oddly inspirational passphrases. I still remember a year or so ago, one of our house favorites was 'To Infinity and Beyond.' It just had a really majestic ring to it, you know." Hermione was now using the corner of her handkerchief to wipe her eyes. "I know what you mean. That does sound majestic. You know, I need to get my father and Blaise together sometime. My father is a big Trekkie too." "What's a Trekkie?" "Never mind. So, where's your room?" she asked, her beautiful copper eyes still sparkling with tears. "Just up here." Draco gestured to the staircase next to the fireplace, and they started up the stairs. He opened the door, immediately realizing that Blaise was inside based on the smell of his dark cigarettes. "Ah, this is my cue to leave," the wizard said, grounding out the cigarette in a nearby ashtray. "Blaise." Hermione stopped him with a slight smile on her face. "Before you leave, I just want to say, I see 4 lights." Blaise locked eyes with her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Granger, I think you know there are 5 lights." Blaise moved past them, his laughter echoing down the stairs as he went. Draco looked up at the chandelier, confused. "There are 6 lights on this fixture. What in the name of Merlin are you 2 on about?" Hermione's laughter was contagious, and he couldn't help but chuckle to hear her explanation. He marveled at the very idea, remembering all those years ago watching the team on the telly. He had no clue then that there were dozens, perhaps even hundreds of these little plays out there in the universe. The one Hermione was talking about the future, sounded very interesting. Draco made a note to himself to ask Blaise and Hermione to show it to him one day. With a pang, the thought occurred to him that that day may never come. What if he didn't make it through this war? What if Blaise didn't? But this thought he pushed down, refusing to allow it to take up space inside his head. "Oh." Their hands were joined, and Draco pulled her slowly towards him. "My, I've missed you so much." "I'm so sorry," he said to her. "I know. I got your present. Purple hyacinths. I referenced it in Campbell's guide. I'm just glad you still had the bracelet. And your handkerchief." Draco drew her arm up, extending it in front of her, turning it so that he could place a soft kiss upon her wrist. "I never go anywhere without it. You never know when you need one, or so I've been told." She allowed herself to be pulled closer, draping her free arm around his neck and tugging lightly on his hair at the nape. "You look tired lately." "Not so much now, but this past month or so. Are you all right?" At his amused look, she backtracked. "Well, I mean, I know you're not all right, but are you sleeping all right? Is your bed not comfortable? Are you volunteering to test it out?" Draco nearly whispered. "We could maybe," but she did not finish the sentence, instead leaning into him, placing a feather-like kiss upon his jawline, where a hint of stubble had appeared since he'd last shaved the day before. A moan escaped him as she pressed her body to his. Draco pulled back slightly, taking his wand from its sleeve holster and locking the door, putting a muffliato and a distraction jinx upon it as well. He led her to the edge of the bed, letting her take the lead once they reached it. She pushed down at his shoulders until he sat at the edge of the bed, knees bracketing her legs as she stood in front of him. She began by removing his jumper, pulling it over his head and mussing his hair playfully. Next, she unbuttoned his oxford slowly, kissing her way down his chest. She pushed the shirt just to his shoulders, exposing his chest to her, but mercifully leaving his arms covered. She took off her shoes, and he removed his boots and socks quickly. "I'm leaving my socks on. These dungeons are freezing." His witch smiled at him. He smiled back and cast a warming charm. "That helps, but I'm still wearing them." "I don't mind." "I'll see your toenail polish later," he teased. "It's Gryffindor red," she whispered tauntingly. "Well, then, by all means, keep that covered," he answered drolly, then grinned at her. She grinned back, then took his wand from his hands and cast a perfect contraception charm. It nearly stole his breath how easily she was able to harness her magic through his wand. They lie back together on the bed, Draco gathering the duvet around them. "I missed you," she said between kisses. "Gods, you cannot imagine how much I missed you." "I nearly took out my handkerchief 5 times a day to speak with you," he replied. "I wish you had," she said. "Although I probably wouldn't have been ready to hear what you had to say for a little while." "But don't apologize again," she said, as she saw him about to speak with a sad look upon his face. "I will never stop being sorry for the way I've treated you," he whispered. "I know." "And I'm sorry for ignoring you and pushing you away," she said. "I understood why," he said, cupping her neck under her hair. He pulled her towards him. She smiled adoringly at him. "You're so perfect, he said, "so amazingly beautiful in every way." Draco could only look in wonder at the beauty of this witch, at the magic that surged through her body as she was lost in his kisses. He was amazed that she would deign to even grace him with her presence, much less with her love. "Look at me, love," he said, and her eyes flew open, the blazing copper meeting the molten silver of his adoring gaze. He breathed deeply to fill his lungs with the gardenia scent of her hair. Draco drank in her beauty. He could not take his eyes off of her. She was the living embodiment of magic, as her hair and eyes seemed to glow with it. "My gods, you're perfect, so perfect for me. It's like you were made for me, witch." "I love you, Draco." Their eyes locked, and they moved together. Liquid copper gazed openly at molten silver, and the waves of pure bliss that crashed over Draco were not only physical ones. He was so happy, so relieved to have her back in his life. He felt like a new man, as though the world was starting over with only the two of them. He wanted this feeling to last forever. "Oh,